Hello, everybody. Sorry, we had some technical problems, but let's start. Did you know that we, as developers, spend at least 70% of our time reading, improving, and maintaining the existing code, and only about the left 30% of the time writing new code? With that huge amount of time, we better try our best to optimize and use the right tools to stay productive. A couple years ago, this is how I used to spend that time. Let's suppose, for example, that this is a method in which I believe I have a bug. And the first thing I used to do was to put a lot of print statements. And you may feel identified by this. Usually, I also try to format the prints to get the best amount of information I can, reset the server, repeat the process all over again, until I eventually found the bug. It did the work for me for a really long time, but even if it consumed a lot of my time and made me put a lot of effort crafting the perfect print statement. And sometimes, by mistake, the error was in my print statement. Eventually, I found a way that really worked for me to debug code. Before we deep dive into the talk, let me introduce myself. My name is Milton Lenis, and I'm a senior backend developer for ShipHero, and I'm also a co-organizer for this PyCon. If you have something to say to me, you can reach me in my sites, and also if you're interested in our job postings, you can take a look at this link. Also, the slides for this talk are in this QR if you want to have them. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about senior developers. A senior developer is this person that understands the whole life cycle of software with a lot of experience and ready to tackle any task that might cross their path, right? And let's be honest here, we all care about our seniority. And I don't mean if you call yourself intermediate, semi-senior, semi-senior advanced, or whatever Slack companies are using nowadays. What I really mean is that we all care about making progress in our career. And you can call it self-realization, you can call it reputation, or you can even call it an income boost. We all care. And in order to make progress, you need to have some skills. Let's call them senior skills. And this is a very opinionated subject, but here is a list of some of those skills. You know, a senior developer has to write quality code, have some sort of leadership and mentoring skills, be self-sufficient in their work, and communicate clearly within their team. But there's a single skill that I personally think is one of the most important skills for a senior developer. And this is that a senior developer is a great problem solver. And by consequence, I think the most important soft skill, if you will, to be a great problem solver is debugging. But what even debugging means? The most simple definition I have for debugging is that it's the process of identifying and fixing errors from computer hardware or software. And this means that there is not only one way to fix them, including print statements. They are a way to debug. But as I said in the beginning, there are much better tools to debug, and they are called debuggers. Pretty obvious, right? For me personally, the first contact I had with a debugger in a professional environment was when I first started working for Monadical. We worked in this cool poker site, which was built entirely with Django channels and React.js. And my first assignment was to fix a bug in the backend. So I started all motivated, putting all my shitty print statements around. And since it was a pretty complex code base and it was big, it took a lot of my time to do that. Eventually, I had a pairing session with my team lead, and I discovered some things, like the architecture was written following a deterministic approach in which you could know any state of the game by knowing the initial state and the steps taken in each plate to know like the changes. They also had this good utilities in the code to know the information from an entity, in this case a poker table, and also this nice method called describe, inspired by pandas, to know, for example, which players are seated in the table, the cards, the money they had, and the actions they took. All of this was combined in a session using IPDB, which is the debugger we're going to talk about later. But the important thing is that I felt during the whole session that we were in control the whole time of the situation. And fixing the bug was really easy. Like, even if it was a complex bug, it was really easy to fix. That was the moment where I realized that I needed to master the debugger. By the way, Monadical is one of the sponsors of this PyCon, and they are hiring. If you want to step up your career, please talk to them. So, debuggers, what even are they? Let's say for simplicity that they are tools that let you run code in a controlled environment, letting you stop, resume, restart, move forward and backwards during the life cycle of your piece of code. There are different types of debuggers. Some of them are the UI debuggers, which, as the name says, are debuggers with a graphical interface. Usually they come integrated in your favorite IDE. In this case, there's an example of the debugger from VS Code, which is the debugger I use. Also, we have some of them in the browsers. In this case, the debugger from Google Chrome, which is pretty useful if you are using JavaScript or React or some front-end frameworks. And of course, the other ones from the rest of the browsers. And on the other hand, we have the CLI debuggers, which are debuggers for the command line, and they are usually easy to install. In this case, we have an example of IPDB. You might be wondering which one should you choose to work. And the answer is, well, it depends. For example, some people like to use Git clients for desktop, and other old-fashioned guys like me like to use the command line. I'd say it's mostly about personal preference, and if you want to know what I use, I'm a Pythonista, and I'm using IPDB because it's a well-written tool for Python, and because it's really easy to install. Also, I like to be as IDE agnostic as I can, and that means that I don't need to have any specific tool or editor to have my debugger. I can install it really easy with a few commands and have it running even in production environments. And I know we all know that we should not debug things in production, but let's face it, sometimes you just have to. And if you are already in a mess, you better have the right tool to get out of it as quick as you can. When I started with IPDB, I found that there are like two versions of the same tool, if you will, but they are in essence the same tool. The difference is that PDB, which is a more lightweight version of the debugger, but not in functionalities, but only in usage, because it uses a simple shell, but it comes already pre-installed with Python. You can just call the commands and use it. And on the other hand, we have IPDB, which the main difference is that it uses the shell from IPython, which give you some nice goodies like highlighted code, auto-completion, code history, and a lot more. I'd say for most of the time, just use IPDB. By the way, the creator of IPython is one of the keynote speakers for this conference. Please don't miss his talk. So, to get started with IPDB, it's mostly about just calling it with the PDB set trace method. And after that, you just have to use the right command for stepping, adding dynamic breakpoints, and printing stuff to the shell. You don't have to remember all of those commands by memory, and you don't have to learn all of them to become a decent debugger. Also, these are not all of them, I believe, but you can have this cheat sheet as a reference, but also you can always look through the documentation inside the tool. But instead of talking one by one of them, let's just show them in a light demo, which you should not do. This is a very simple example. Are you seeing it? Yeah. Let me just close this. This is a simple endpoint I built using Flask, and it uses also the Spotify API. And what it does is that it uses search for anything you want to search, like artists, tracks, and albums. If you want to take a quick look at the code, it just takes some arguments and call the endpoint from Spotify, parse the results, and show them as a JSON. These are the methods to parse the code, and this is the call from Spotify. Let's run this real quick. By the way, if you want to install IPDB and IPython, you just have to install them using pip. I'm not doing that because the internet is a betrayer, but you just have to use those two commands. I already have them installed in this virtual environment, so I'm just going to run the server. And let's look. This is an example of the endpoint. You just do a query to the endpoint and pass the arguments, in this case the search term, the limit of records you want to have, and the type of the search. Let's just try it, which will fail. Yeah, it will. That's why you don't have to do live demos, guys. No, I'm kidding. The thing is that the Spotify API has a refresh policy of 1 hour, and I was too lazy to implement the refresh policy in my code, so I just have to change the token. This is not secret. You can have it. It's not a problem. Let me just paste it. I already had prepared this, but since we took some time preparing the scenario, I lost my hour of refresh, so I need to do it again. And hopefully this works. Yeah, so you can see that for a search, we get the artist, the duration of the song. In this case, I'm looking for a song. You get the name. Well, the API works. Let's jump to a different branch in which it doesn't work. If I run the code again, the server again, and I search the same that just worked, we get an error. And if you take a look at the traceback, you could realize that maybe it's simple to fix if you know the code. It's saying that we are getting a known type object is not iterable error. We can just go to the line in which he's saying, which is this, and we can try with the old-fashioned style, which I said in the beginning, which is prints. Let's create some prints real quick. And for example, we can print this here. Okay. If we try again, this is what I told in the beginning. So you will get, of course, the error again, and you will get the prints. The problem is that sometimes you have a lot of information in your code. In this case, this is pretty unreadable. You may do this, you may try to read it and fix the bug, but it takes effort. It's not just comfortable. So let's now try using the debugger. And I'm not going to call it from here. Let me just call it from the beginning so I can show you a few of the commands. The way to call it, as I said, is just to import. This is a bad practice in code to do an inline import and two lines in the same line, two lines. But this is kind of a convention to call in the IPDB, so it's just okay. You are going to delete the code. Also, from Python 3.7, you can call the breakpoint built-in function, which does the same, but by default it uses a PDB. If you want to use IPDB, you have to set an environment variable. It's really simple. So let's just stick to the old way and do this again. If I call the endpoint, it will stay there and show me the debugger. From here, I can use commands like next to move forward one line, and I can print stuff calling just the variable name, for example, and I can see it. I can use also P, but it's more verbose. And for example, you can list the session in the code you are in. If I use L, it showed me a couple lines around the line I'm stepped in currently. And I can use double L to print the whole method. If you have a long method, it will print it. I can only use things that I currently have processed, if you will. For example, if I type here search type, it will not recognize it because I haven't passed that line yet. One of the great ways for this tool, for example, is that you could, let me just move forward to have the search type already processed. And I can print, for example, things like this in advance, so I know this assertion is passing. And also I can move forward like one step at a time with the step command. It will go line by line also, but if it finds a method call, it will enter there, so it will go inside the other method, which is this, the method to call the API. And I can move forward here. As I'm doing right now, I can use also the W command, which is where. And I'll get the whole trace of the application I'm running even the third-party application or the dependencies, and it shows me where I'm standing now. I can go up in the trace back, and in this case I'll be again in my main method, and I can print stuff again. And I also can go down again to the method in which I am. I can use the return command to just go and return the results from this method. And it will show me the return and take me back to my previous piece of code. Let me move forward. You could add dynamic breakpoints. For example, I can go to this file, which is the one in which we suspect the error is. I can just get the file name and add a dynamic breakpoint with Spotify search, utils.py, colon, and the line number. Let's go for number 2. And it says me that I've added a new breakpoint. And if I click, if I put the continue command, it will run the code until it finds the new breakpoint, which I can also add calling the setTrace method. So let's do this. And we can call the things we already tried in the beginning. In this case, again, we have a lot of information. We cannot work with that, but we can just check what went wrong here. If I call this line, I get known, and since it's going inside this line, it's failing because a known type is not iterable. So I can just call piece by piece. This again is really big, and we cannot do much with that, but I can just get the keys from that JSON. And the first thing we'll notice is that maybe, elements is not present here, and maybe we confuse that with items. I mean, this is a really simple example, I know, but you just imagine in your current workflow what could happen. In this case, if we do get the items, it works, hopefully, and we can just try or fix. Let's just change this by items. When the code changes, depending on your tool for the backend, in this case, Flask is resetting the server, and I can just go and remove my breakpoint and try again. Nope. And that way we just fix the bug. As I said, this is a very simple example. It's a toy example, but you just imagine how much time it will take for me to using print statements, and how much time does it usually take for you in your endeavors, in your job, or in your open source coding, I don't know. How much is it taking for you if you are using print statements? Let's just go back to this. Oh, by the way, if you want to have the code, this is the repository. And of course, you're not going to become faster just by installing the debugger and trying to use it. You have to get used to it, to practice, to learn some of the most basic commands, at least not by memory, but know what they do and try them. And I say in a couple days, maybe a week or two, you'll notice the difference. You'll notice that you're faster than before with your prints. In my case, it helped a lot, for example, in my ramping up process at ShipHero, since it was also a big code base, as all companies should have. Since it didn't have a lot of documentation and stuff, I just went with my tool and putting breakpoints all around and trying to print stuff and following the steps of the code. And that helped me to get an idea of the code really fast. And nowadays, I'm one of those persons that they always get to when they want to fix a quick bug. I don't know if they think that I understand the code base a lot, and that's not the case. I just use the correct tool for the job. Of course, this talk isn't enough to learn the debugger. This is a nice resource that you can read to get a better understanding from. This is a tutorial from Real Python. And also, Sergio is going to give a workshop about the debugger. I believe he's going to use IPDB, and of course, he's going to go deeper in the debugger. So if you haven't registered yet, and you can, please do and attend the workshop. That's all. Thank you.